R&B the podcast, R&B the podcast, R&B the podcast with Russ and Blake. R&B the podcast, R&B the podcast, R&B the podcast with Russ and Blake. It's just us today. All right, y'all. R&B podcast. We back at it. Should be episode 45.
Episode 45 out here.
Blessed.
Yes,
Thank you,
yes.
God, for the opportunity to have a little conversation with my boy. No guest today.
Yeah.
We have certain things in our lives that are just going to always be extremely relevant. How we operate, how we speak, interact with one another, our priorities. All of this kind of trickles down into the base value of just having a philosophy of life, you know?
Sure.
Knowing what you want to think about and what you want to ask questions in regards to those thoughts, right? And my boy Russ got a minor in philosophy. Just a little bit of background to his name there.
True.
I took a philosophy class once, but
Were you
even
interested
then,
in that philosophy class? Like, when you take it, did you like it?
yeah, well, it was world philosophy, so it was very broad.
Okay.
But it definitely got the wheels turning in my head, you know, asking those deep questions and kind of thinking more into why our society is structured the way it is and how our social norms have come to be what they are. And asking those questions, I think, is very important because I think it's a lot easier to come up with an answer when you know what question to ask, right? And sometimes we have problems that we're faced with, but don't even necessarily understand, like, what the problem is or what questions we need to be asking to solve it.
Sure. Or that our inclination to ask those questions isn't so unique. There's also been other human beings for thousands of years that have pondered upon the same questions that you're starting to grapple with. So that's one thing I love about philosophy is that when you learn about the history, you see that you're actually connected to a lot of people who felt the same stressors that you did and then came up with the same questions. And I just think it's beautiful because it's almost like the stress in our environment forces us to think.
Yeah, it does. And when you talk about how stress is necessary, you know, we want to try to have some level of control of the stress, and we can only withstand a certain level of stress, technically speaking. But once you learn to thrive under those stressful environments, then you can really, really accelerate your growth when there's not that unwanted stress in your space, right?
For sure. I mean, whatever you believe about evolution, technically that's what an evolution is that you're under the pressure to evolve into a new thing. And then once you evolve, you're more equipped or adapt to be in your environment. And we can do that being philosophical creatures through thought and contemplation. Yeah.
And when you take that approach to be philosophical, it really just opens up a lot of room for opportunity because I think that that's the easiest way to potentiate growth in your life is to just question things. A lot of things we're taught and we just take it for fact, and it's okay to ask questions as long as you're doing it in a respectful manner and doing your due diligence to actually seek those answers too.
Yeah, and when you say doing it in a respectful manner, that's key. Like, you can't be egocentric and go about your questions trying to disregard the respect for other people's cultures, right? So you ask these questions, but you can't like go and just try to belittle people because they have something that you haven't understood yet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so you have to be very careful about letting your own biases from your upbringing and your culture distort your view when you start to learn about the history of philosophy and just people in general and cultures in general. You know,
that approach is a philosophy in and of itself, right?
100%, because what you're probably trying to do is get as close to an unbiased perspective as possible as you're regarding these questions of life and the world.
Yeah, and it makes it a lot easier to operate within other people's philosophies when you're the one that's trying to be understanding, right? And having that willingness to learn about someone else's perspective and have that empathy sometimes to understand that you can't understand because you haven't really gone through their experience also, and you might not necessarily have the background that it takes to fully actually understand, but you can accept it for what it is, right?
Yeah, and also sometimes can be a goal that you're shooting towards, right? Because sometimes you could read the philosophies of some great writers. You could read some Aristotle, or you get into the Socratic method, and you could hold yourself up to that standard, not forgetting that these are like 60-year-old men, right? And you have a different set of like hormones and temperaments than a 60-year-old man. So, sometimes you can hold yourself to be like, oh man, I shouldn't be having this type of inclination or desire. But it's like, well, you scale it back to where you're at in your, timeline, and you give yourself grace, but you're shooting at something better. But you also have to give yourself grace and forgiveness if you're falling short while you're studying these philosophers. You know what I'm saying? Because I've got caught up on that, where I'm reading something and I'm like, man, this is exactly how somebody should form their ideas and perceptions of the world. But then mine falls short, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm not.
It's the same story in a different book, right? And we just have to have discernment with all this information we're taking in, because it's never going to be able to be directly applied in the same exact way that someone else did. And when it comes down to it, one person's solution is not going to work for everybody.
No, and we are all very much like our own book. That's why philosophy is cool, because it has the things that make us similar, but then it's idiosyncratic to your own life, meaning that you only have your unique perspective or your own unique book on what you've gone through and what makes you you, and how you've developed your philosophy and your perspective on the world. And that's what makes it beautiful.
Were you into philosophy like before you started college? Why did you decide to study that as a minor?
I don't really know. I don't think I was. I remember when I was a freshman in college, I just spent a lot of time in the library, and I gravitated towards the psychology and philosophy section. And those were the books that were just kind of like keeping my attention the most when I would read them. So then, learning about different philosophers and just these deep questions that to me are fun conversations when I have them with like my brother or my cousins. But then I hear this person writing about it who wrote 1,000 pages and contemplated it for 40 years. It's like, whoa, that can be even more mind blowing. I'm talking to my 19-year-old friends and they're blowing my mind with their perspective. But then you read about this person who dedicated their life to this one question, and it's like, okay, wait, they go way deeper than you might even have thought.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of my early inspiration to study these things was really just to take it back to my friends and be like, yo, when we talk about this, let's talk about this now.
Yeah, that's important. That's one reason that you and I have been good friends, because we enjoy having those kind of conversations. And I have friends that we're good friends, but they don't necessarily jump into those type of engaging conversations very often. And especially us being former athletes, being involved in the sports world, it's like you can easily get in a group of guys and only talk about sports and never talk about anything else, right? But life is much more deeper than that. And philosophy for me has just brought me to more of an appreciation for my situation, and then also giving me the perspective to realize that the point I'm in is minuscule in relation to where I will probably end up, God willing, that I have the opportunity to live to get there. But regardless of what my path looks like, I know that I'm going to end up in a much different place where I am now. And that's not only because I have the aspirations that I'm working towards, but also because I ask these questions like, why is my situation like this? Like, why is that person's situation different? Like, how am I thinking that could be possibly holding me back? And what do I believe in that is propelling me forward? Right? And asking questions, but not necessarily getting hung up on the answer is important too, because some philosophers never even technically find the answer to what it is they're asking, and it's the pursuit that you have to fall in love with.
It is very much the pursuit that you have to fall in love with. Whatever your discipline program has become to writing or reading or speaking, whatever it is, how you're expressing this desire to understand these things, that becomes like the ultimate pursuit. One thing I think is interesting you bring up about us being athletes is like we're old enough now to know that we know that there are human beings that have the same physical capabilities of a Michael Jordan and a Kobe Bryant and a Cam Newton and all these people. We know these dudes. Like they exist. You see them in parks and you see them around. So then you learn that the way that these specific individuals that made it think is what separated them. It's not because they jump higher than the average. Well, they jump higher than the average human being, but there's other unique genetic people like them who don't get to those levels, and it's all because of the philosophies that they created towards what it is that they do.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that shows how important it is for your set of thinking.
Yeah, because physical capability is not going to really have much of a role when it comes to battling with philosophy. Like the thinker is always going to come out on top.
100%. And you get into the NBA, and these are all very intellectual dudes. And it's because they had to think their way to this point. You know what I'm saying? Because so many, you could go watch any NAIA game or a lot of JUCO basketball and see people that are just as athletic as these dudes going first round, but it's just the difference is how they think of the game, how they see the game,
and how they think about themselves and their role in the game.
Exactly.
Yeah, and their opponent, of course. We've talked about needing to respect your opponent, and that's a philosophy that I think a lot of athletes would maybe disagree with, because you're like trying to expose your opponent, right? And you want to show your dominance over them. But there's a lot of very, highly regarded athletes that have shown continuous respect to their opponent. Even Patrick Mahomes is one. Guys tackle him, he tells them good job afterwards, every single time. And he's been at the pinnacle of what you can accomplish in the football realm. And it's a sport that's seen as kind of barbaric and very aggressive, and a lot of those guys aren't respected for their intelligence. But especially at the quarterback level, you can see how needing to have that understanding at a higher level is so important. And I think that in basketball, it's one of those where the positions don't really differentiate quite as much as in football. And so you can see kind of that similar mentality and approach between like a center to a guard, from what I know. But, with the interplay of a referee and needing to have that background knowledge of what the basketball player is experiencing during the game and outside of the game, and how all those things bleed into the game itself is very important if you want to operate at a high level, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Because there's certain characteristics of people that come out when they're at play or when they're put into a real situation in the world. And whenever they have the pressure on them, it's our personality and temperaments that come out, right? So you have to be able to deal with that in high emotion situations, and having an understanding of maybe why will help you all the more, because it'll keep it from you taking it so personal. And then you can just say like, oh, Blake, when things start to go, when things start to get a little emotional and his teammates get riled up, like Blake's usually a peacemaker. So I might, if you're playing, I might try to get on your side early and be like, hey, I know you're a peacemaker, just by the way you carry yourself. When your dude starts tripping, why don't you go talk to him before I have to? You know what I mean? And little things like that can help you out in managing a game.
Yeah. And anticipation can be a great tool for you.
Yeah.
Right?
But now what's interesting is why is Blake a peacemaker, and why is this power forward so angry the second something doesn't go his way? That gets into philosophy, because it's like, what about these last 20 years got you to the point where when things are going crazy, you might just try to keep peace, and this guy wants to make it mayhem the minute he doesn't agree with something. And
a lot of people don't take the time to really take those factors into consideration, and that can dramatically change what your experience is with someone else. And I tend to have good experiences with strangers because I take into account that I don't know anything about them. And hopefully I can get enough information to where I can operate in a way that's going to be respectful in their opinion, and also get me in a space where I feel safe because they have an understanding of my approach as well, right? But understanding and communication is always the foundation when it comes to human interaction, because that's one of our greatest tools that we have as humans. You try to talk about what differentiates us from the animal realm. Most of it's our communication and our ability to collaborate.
Right. And these great Greek philosophers, when you talk about Athens, and you like Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, these different people that they would say would speak or only write, but the ones that would speak, the ones that would give out speeches, a lot of people gathered around to hear them talk their philosophy because it was very entertaining. I was like, wow. And we do the same thing today. In my opinion, the Joe Rogans and the Joe Buddens and all these podcasters that people just want to hear talk about anything, they're expressing the same thing that like Aristotle was in ancient Greece, right? Now, the reason why I'm saying this is, one, because I think that we have the call to it, but then let me get into more of the philosophical side. So they always talk about how in the Delphi there was this sign that says "Man, know thyself," and that's one of the huge, motifs, themes of philosophy. Man, know thyself. So I'm wondering to you, like, what do you think that really means, and why is that a message that they say in the philosophical realm?
I think knowing yourself comes with spending time with yourself and your own thoughts, and developing self-love and practicing self-care and really indulging in your own being and feeling your presence, right? I think some people feel like they know themselves and prioritize themselves, but it comes out as selfishness, and that's not necessarily the same thing. And so when people are taking care of the things I mentioned in a healthy manner, it puts them in a situation where they are healthy enough mentally to consider other people and know how they would feel if certain things happen to them, and they can make sure that they treat people in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
So it all starts with the self. So when you know yourself, you have the ability to branch out and do all these other amazing things. But it's like if you overlook that self aspect, then you're definitely going to fall short in all these other endeavors around you.
Yeah. How could that endeavor of knowing yourself possibly be selfish?
No, I was saying it's the opposite.
Yeah, well, because you were saying but some people could do it for a selfish reason, or
What I was meaning to say is that when someone does not prioritize developing themselves, then their behaviors are going to appear as selfish.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, that's real.
Because we, regardless of who we are and what we're interested in, we all want to do well. We all want to be safe and be healthy. So how you go about bringing those fruits into your life is going to be significantly different if you're someone who works on yourself as a human being versus just trying to survive and feeling threatened by the other people around you. You feel more connected when you understand your presence and yourself and your thoughts, and don't have these insecurities and other things kind of battling your attention when you go interact with other people.
Man, and that's huge what you just said, because the ability to even sit and think means that you aren't distracted. And that might be one of the biggest things about philosophy too, is because you're training yourself to think without being distracted, and that in and of itself is a huge obstacle for the human mind.
The man sitting on a rock, right? It's like so simple but so important, because a lot of people can't stand to do that. Just sit in the silence and actually think about your thoughts.
Yeah, it's funny. There's this movie called I Heart Huckabees, and the premise is that there's these existential detectives, and people will hire them when their lives are going weird. And these existential detectives set up cameras at their work and cameras at home,
Kinda dissect what's going on.
Literally everything. And some of the things that'll happen is the clients or the people that have purchased this service, they'll find out that they make the same joke 6 times a day to different sets of people. They'll be at work and they said it, and they're at the grocery store, they said it, and they don't even realize how repetitive they are in their speech. So the existential people are yo, look, you think you're funny.
So that's subconscious?
In a way, yes. But the only reason I brought this up, I thought that was funny, but I brought up the movie because in the movie they have a practice where they have the people go into this black, it's a bag basically, and they zip it up, and they're supposed to meditate in there, and they learn how to meditate. But whenever people start it, it's they'll be all right, imagine a serene forest, and then the forest will come up, and then out of nowhere it'll be their ex-girlfriend hacking the forest with a machete, and they're wait, I can't, and then it'll be something else that happened in their life, mows it down and starts fires and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So they're trying to show imagery of how when they're trying to calm their mind, all these past things that are very emotional jump in and kind of tear it to pieces, and then the people will be open the suit, they couldn't stand at the beginning sitting in that silence and that darkness.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was amazing imagery for how it can be when we start trying to sit in silence.
Yeah, that's a good way to paint that picture. I think about how I used to think that strength of mine was that I could multitask, and it was a few months ago that I realized that was one of my biggest weaknesses, because I couldn't focus. I always thought I was supposed to be doing 2 or 3 things at once, and then it would take me twice as long to complete a task, but I thought that I was saving time because I completed 2 things at the same time. Whereas if I had sat and focused and done one thing at a time, I would have maybe cut that actual work time in half, right? And I only bring that up because I think that philosophy plays such a critical role in our perspective, and it's interesting with us having social media, you'll get memories, right? And so my philosophy just as a human being is completely turned upside down since it did when I was in high school. And I have these ridiculous posts that pop up. And one I thought was ridiculous. Some people might not understand how crazy it is, like in relation to like what my lifestyle is now. Yeah. But I literally put, I hate working out in the mornings.
Oh, that's like, funny.
That's like literally foundation of how I live now.
Yeah.
And, you know, just I could be someone that was never willing to change that little piece of my routine.
Sure. If you kept identifying with that message over and over through the years, maybe you would have believed it for sure.
And that's why, I mean, I'm very aware of the fact that a lot of the things that I believe now may very well be wrong. And I think that some people's biggest downfall is the need to be right. And I used to always be that person. And it's tough when you do put in the time to study and try to be educated, and people label you as intelligent, and you have to stay humble and realize that you don't know what you don't know. That's what my dad has always told me, and it's so true, because having that openness and understanding that there's always more to learn is what's going to put you in a situation where people are looking towards you for information. But you also have to be prepared to tell people that you don't know the answer.
For sure. Right. And the information in itself will humble you, because the more you start to seek more information, the more you're like, man, I don't know anything. Right. I need to just get my little humble cloak on and go learn like a studious monk.
The more you know, the less you think you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, oh man, there's
and that's a really fun place to get to, where you're like, okay, like I'm just gonna observe, because I'm gonna stop trying to impose my current level of thinking on everything, because that would be hubris, and that would be immature. Right?
Yeah. And it kind of adds the humility automatically, because you're like, man, I don't know anything, but he don't know anything either, right? And it's not in a disrespectful way, because he knows something that you don't know.
Yeah, and he has to work just as hard as I do to start to know more. And that's where we're all on the equal playing field, right? Because it's like, you either have worked harder than me and I need to catch up, or it's, you know, you're at my level and we both have work to do, or you're below me and like, you know, hit me up if you need some help. Yeah, you know, it's literally all the places we could be.
Right. And like you said, hit me up if you need help, because there's a certain point where the competition doesn't make sense.
Right.
We're all on a similar path, but his success is not going to impede upon mine, right? So when you're able to collaborate and help other people, it's going to accelerate your growth, because people are going to be more willing to help you. And that shouldn't be the goal of you helping, but I'm telling you that that's what's going to end up happening. That's just the way the world works. So being selfless and understanding that we are all trying to figure this out, because life is difficult. It's always going to be difficult, always has been difficult. And, you know, we've discussed how we have access to so much more information now. So since we have access to all these answers, we need to be asking more questions, right? And that's where philosophy comes into play. So I kind of question a lot of the things that I do, and not in a way to where I'm paranoid or I feel like I need to change. I just want to make sure that I have purpose behind my actions. So actual definition of philosophy: the study of fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language, originating from the Greek word philosophia, meaning love of wisdom. Love of wisdom. Wisdom. What is wisdom?
You know, when I think of wisdom, I just think of like, it's easier for me to paint this in the idea of human history, because there was a time where our adventurous endeavors going outside of what we knew could possibly get us killed, because we could be traveling into a land that we haven't explored yet. There could be some type of mammal over there that eats us. There could be some type of spider over there that's poisonous. There could be some type of disease over there we haven't built an immunity to yet. There's all these things that as we ventured out could possibly harm us. So I believe that wisdom is when people started figuring out how to overcome the unknown variables, and they passed it back as knowledge. Wisdom was like applying that and then figuring out new variables of the unknown to conquer and tell, right? And then applying that is wisdom. And now the point we're at is a beautiful place because we have conquered so many unknown variables and we can, be in control of so much, but we still have the unknown. So it's like, I don't know if we're any better or not, but we still have the wisdom to help us.
Right. Yeah, that is a great way to put it. And that's why I'm so grateful to be alive in the time that we are, because essentially wisdom should be a compounding factor, right? So it's like all of our ancestors' wisdom does get passed on to us in a way.
Yeah.
You have to grow into it, right? You're not just out of the womb being wise, but you have these teachers around you. We have these texts around us. We have these thoughts around us that we kind of have a little foundation, and we're not technically starting from a fresh slate because we have these other influences that are going to play a role into our development and our philosophies.
Yeah, and it's interesting, though, because we have new threats. So it's like, our ancestors might have been believing that if they got in a band of 150 and put themselves in a certain position, then a certain type of mammal that usually attacks them as an individual wouldn't attack them as a group. So getting into that group is wise because now we're not going to get hurt by this specific thing. But we have new threats now. A lot of them can come with our ego, how people view us, but then also you have the threat of, no, I'm just going to stay with that, just the ego. That's like our new threat, right? Because it used to be, oh my gosh, this lion could pull up on me and eat me. And now it's like, well, I'm probably not going to get eaten by a lion, but if my friends think that I'm stupid, they might not like me anymore. Or if this person thinks that I'm a fool or that I'm jealous or they see me some type of way that I don't want them to see me, it almost alerts the same part of our nervous system that a lion attacking us used to, if you allow it. This is like the new field we have to work in, right?
So it's more of a social threat.
Right, because what hormone would be released if something was attacking you?
Adrenaline.
Yeah, adrenaline, cortisol, right? And these are the same things that are released when you're sitting there thinking about how you're going to be seen as such a fool. And when you think about how somebody's going to judge you, like those same hormones are excreted. So it's a similar system.
Yeah, and it goes deep because those are also good hormones. You need them in balance and you want them to peak at certain times and certain situations when you have certain emotions. And so, it's interesting. We talk about the threat and the fight or flight, but we do things like cold plunge, which also increases that adrenaline and affects your cortisol and affects your inflammation in your body. So we have like these external factors that we can use to control those responses, but the internal is where all of the capability comes from. Because again, you talk about the cold plunge in ways where you're stimulating these responses, but you can't even tolerate that stimulation if you don't have the mental strength and capacity to withstand the stress.
That's beautiful, because that's the philosophy, right? It's like, what do you think about this stress, and how, and it has to do with how you'll respond to it. And now you're cooking with the sauce, because you come out in the world and you get in front of all these big pressure moments, and you've already trained yourself how to deal with the new threat. Right.
And life's painful. I don't care what anybody says. Life's painful, but there's different thresholds of pain that we can all tolerate, and there's different levels of pain that we all experience, and we all have a different interpretation of what that pain is, right? But there's so many difficult things that we all have to deal with inevitably, and we talk about how you can use those experiences to shape your beliefs and your philosophy and your path and your drive, or you can fall victim to those things as well. And again, having that sense of self and presence, which many people develop through meditation, and having that silence and being with your thoughts, that's what is going to give you the opportunity to take control of those situations as well. But I think trying it out is the hardest part for people. I've heard so many people say, I don't like meditating, I don't like yoga, I can't do it. And I wonder how many of them have actually put their full effort into just one session and what they expect the standard to be. Because to me, I can meditate for 5 minutes and get what I need. That's better than none.
Yeah.
But You know, an hour yoga class, yeah, it can sound a lot more daunting. And then just having the, I guess, the leeway in deciding what it's going to look like in your life. Because we can all paint a definition on what something is. If I was sitting in silence for 5 seconds, somebody might say it's not meditation. But if it is for me, it is. And if I believe that that's benefiting me, it will benefit me. Yeah. And having that belief in that, and just really thinking about what you're doing has a lot of power as well, because some of what we do is placebo, but placebo can actually drive real results, right?
That's real.
So somebody can think they're taking a real medication and sometimes have the effects of the medication itself.
And that's clinically proven.
Clinically proven. And then voila, you don't even have the side effects.
You thought yourself to the result.
Yeah. And some people don't think they're capable of that, but we're all capable of that. But it comes down to your philosophy. If you don't believe that you're capable of that, and you're not asking the questions that are necessary to get to that point of being able to do that, then you're always going to fall short.
Yeah, and we also face the hurdle of feeling like our question is blasphemous, depending on what kind of household you came up in with their religious views, their theological views. Sometimes it can be hard to balance between the world of theology and philosophy, especially if you believe that some of your questions might be blasphemous. That's very difficult for people to get past.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I might not even want to ask this question because it goes against my parents' belief, my beliefs, my family's beliefs.
Yeah, that's a dangerous place to be in, where you don't feel safe enough to ask a question, because it's always going to stifle your progress. And it's going to bleed into other areas like, oh, I didn't get a chance to ask that question and get that answer. Like, I probably shouldn't ask this question either. And then it's like backed up all of these things that you could have learned or been exposed to, and kind of lifted weight off of your shoulders and realization, but you can't even get the insight that you need to kind of clear that out of your path. So that's why, you know, as parents and teachers and coaches, leaders, we just have to invite questions. I've been hearing more, I feel, in my life, like there's no such thing as stupid questions. And then every once in a while I hear a question that kind of battles that thought, but when it comes down to it, that person needs to ask that question. They need the answer to the question so that they can stop asking not the best questions. But you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and the spirit of curiosity is beautiful. So it's like however you wanted to express that.
Yeah.
You know, you'll see so many students that won't ask questions. Like they're sitting there looking at you. And it's like, bro,
and you know they're confused.
Yeah, it's like, I know
you're waiting, you want to help them, but you can't ask the question for them. You need to know what they're confused about.
And it's a skill to ask a question. You know what I mean? So it's like developing that skill is way more than if I were to give you this answer.
Big time.
You know?
Big time. Yeah. I mean, that's what people are making jobs out of that now. We talk about AI taking away from jobs. People have a jobs where they just have to ask the AI the right question, and they're getting paid a lot of money to do that. Yeah. And some people, like you said, don't know how to ask questions. That's a good point.
Or like I was saying, that new threat of the ego, how am I going to be perceived? So that cortisol gets to pumping because they're like, man, if I ask this, is everyone going to think I'm dumb? Like they might already know. And that's usually what they think. Usually it is an increased state as far as their
I've been there too.
Awareness.
Yeah. Especially when you're in certain settings. Like I've been in classes with a bunch of nurses where we're all at a high level. Like we have an understanding of critical care and ICU and different drugs and therapies, X, Y, and Z. And then we'll talk about something that's a relatively basic concept, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that detail. Yeah. And then sometimes I'm like on the side trying to research it myself where I could have just asked the instructor, but it's like 100 other people going to hear me ask this question. Yeah. They might think less of my knowledge or my capabilities. Like I wouldn't want someone to think I'm incompetent, right? But if it comes down to it, I didn't know that. It might be in my best interest that everybody else knows that I don't know that. Yeah. They might be able to fill in some of the other blanks and connect some more dots for me, right? And so that humility and understanding that we all got to start somewhere. Just make sure once you ask a question, you actually learn that information.
Yeah, and that's one of the useful parts about the stress that you feel when you're wanting to ask a question, is because since you have raised those hormone levels and you're in that state, it's going to be unique now. It's not just your everyday chilling anymore. So you're probably going to remember it because you remember how it made you feel when you didn't know. You know what I'm saying? Like that's one of the little hacks, is that when you make a moment unique because of the way you feel, you usually are going to remember that.
And overcoming that fear is always going to be beneficial.
Yeah.
That little voice is telling you shouldn't because someone's going to judge you. You always got to push that down.
For sure. And how great do we feel after we do that? You know what I mean? That's like you've had those moments with all types of things. Like you see somebody you think is attractive and you go ask them for their number or whatever it might be. When you overcome that little fear that you have, it always feels great right after.
Yeah, right after.
Whether you succeeded or not, you're just like, man, I faced that fear. Like, good job.
Yeah, I even had someone show up to the gym the other day and they're just like, man, I really did not want to come in today. Like, that was difficult, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but you made it. Like, pat yourself on the back. Like, we about to get this work in. You're here. That was the hardest part. So many times the hardest part is showing up. The hardest part is not making an excuse, because some people, their best skill is making excuses.
Man. Yeah.
Right? And I've been there too, where you want to get out of maybe a social event, or you want to, make up for a mistake you made at work or something, right? We all want to explain our way out of certain things, but forcing yourself to follow through with commitment is a very good habit to make. And I think that is a philosophy, because some people think that, well, life gets in the way. Like, sometimes I was like, well, you can probably make happen what you said you were going to make happen if you really want to prioritize that. Same way I tell people, we make time for the things that we want to make time for. We find ways to pay for the things that we want to buy.
That's true.
Right?
You make the things happen that you really want.
Yeah.
Like, somehow. Yeah.
Because most people don't worry about what their bank account's looking like when they try to go buy some alcohol.
True.
Right?
True. But
when it comes down to something that is 9 out of 10 times going to be way more beneficial for your life than that alcohol was, all of a sudden we start trying to count numbers and budget.
Yeah, and we're back to philosophy, because it's going to be which one has the more hit of gratification in that moment. And philosophy will usually point to delaying gratification,
Always.
Whereas like your desires are going to point to instant gratification, right? So it's like that spectrum of like what they talk about, like the id, ego, and superego. That's the psychoanalytic understanding of what an ego is. The id is like your impulse, super impulsive desires. And the spectrum between your id and delaying gratification is like, where is your thought? Like, how long were you able to think that? How long were you able to delay it because of your belief system or whatever it is that you had that got you to the delayed gratification where it's always better? Or I'm not going to say always better. I'll say sometimes better, because we don't know. And this is a philosophical conundrum. If you really want to do it, is it really the wrong thing to do?
Depends on the context.
Anything. Like, okay.
Harming people, I think, is where you're like, okay, we can say that's...
Why would somebody want to harm someone?
They might think that they're going to get something out of it. Someone stole your wallet recently. They disregarded your life and your emotions.
That's true.
Because they wanted instant gratification. They saw a way that they could benefit, and they're probably going to continue to operate in that fashion, but eventually it's going to catch up to them and be their detriment.
That's very true. And it's funny that you said that, because like Blake said, I had my car robbed, window shattered, and they stole my wallet. Stupid me for leaving my wallet, but I was very mad. And I even thought to myself in that moment when I was like sitting out there, I was like, man, like, I want to hurt the person that did this. And then I'm like, what am I thinking, bro? Like, I'm out here, what am I seeking revenge? Like, let me go on about my day. Like, what am I even talking about? But I could see your dad. I could see how in certain situations where now they involve your child or something and their safety, you could hurt someone with a righteous philosophy, and it's what you wanted to do.
Well, I mean, it was on your property, so it's like they invaded my fortress. Now I feel like I got to strap up and be ready for next time they come, type thing. Yeah. And so you could say, yes, you left your wallet in your car. Hey, that person would be an opportunistic. But that's probably not the accurate way to look at it, right? Because when it comes down to it, that person was getting delayed or instant gratification, busting into someone's car. If anything, they could come knock on the door and ask you for some money.
For sure, man. And they left all of the books that I had in my car. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, man, you should have grabbed some literature while you were at it. Like, you go get your knowledge up, bro.
Yeah,
like,
that person will read when they get locked up.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's
just how it works.
True. That's
though.
kind of the fate of a criminal, right? Instant gratification, you get locked up. Exactly. You learn wisdom. You learn philosophy. Oh, man, I can't just take everything. Let me figure out how I could tune my brain to get myself
Our boy
stuck.
talked to us about that on the show. George explained that very well. Yeah. And some people learn that lesson in a difficult way, and some people never learn the lesson, right? Mm-hmm. But the earlier you can understand that delayed gratification is always going to set you up for success, the more successful you're going to be. Because when we go on these journeys and try to get to that point way over there, and we know it's going to take a while, we don't realize we're going to pick up all these other beneficial traits and skills and experiences along the way while we're being patient to get what we think we want.
Facts.
Right?
Yeah, that's very true.
And so you can have 10 things benefiting you and you're like, dang, I thought that was what I needed and wanted. But now I see, A, it's going to be way easier to get over there. And B, now I'm going to be way better prepared when I actually get it because I had to take all of these steps along the way. And now I realize that this path and this process is here for a reason.
Yeah, and you're standing on your wisdom now. You're standing on your experiences. I think that's one of the key differences if I'm even able to take a shot at trying to say what I think the difference between theology and philosophy is. I believe that it's in theology, you get into, people have to believe in it. There's certain realms and somebody has to say, I believe in this story or I believe in this story or this one. Whereas in philosophy, it's like, you don't have to believe in the fact that if you shoot 100 shots a day, your jump shot's going to get better. That just lives in the physical world. You know what I'm saying? Or if you read this amount, your reading's going to get better. You're going to articulate things better. Like, philosophy gets more into just like, that's just what happens systematically. Whereas in theology, it's kind of depending on what you believe this happened.
Well, yeah, theology, there should be like either a person or text that has the answer, right?
In theology?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because it's always going to be which text do you believe in.
Exactly.
Right? So, yeah, if I have the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita all next to each other, it's like, which one am I going to believe in for the typical person?
But philosophy, it's like, even when there's an answer, the question's still open-ended, I feel. I don't know, does philosophy ever end in a singular correct answer for the question that's being asked? Because even like you were asking, is delayed gratification really that important? Is it the gentleman breaking into your car that's being opportunistic, good for him? Or is it you being careless?
Yeah.
Right?
And ethics and things like ethics and of that nature are always going to be up to be reevaluated because our environment's going to keep changing, right? So that's the thing about the philosophy, is that as the environment is changing, you have to look at it again.
That's tough to accept, that ethics is a dynamic thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I feel like when I first heard that, I had a hard time understanding it. I'm like, no, there's certain things that are never acceptable.
Right.
But it's like, okay, well, let's start to talk about how you can manipulate that environment to make it seem like it's now acceptable. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say that there's anything that's right and wrong. So you're going to have to look at it through the lens of what are you even talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think everyone developing their own philosophy is important because some people are very strong in their beliefs and their philosophies and are just headed completely in the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. But they can be so persuasive in their approach and their I guess, intention, because sometimes intention doesn't necessarily line up with the actions, right? Sometimes those folks that are not developing their philosophy will fall into that. And then that's a big group of people with the wrong philosophy.
Yeah.
And I do feel comfortable saying that there are wrong philosophies.
Yes.
That's a philosophy of mine. That a lot of people are just not asking the right questions in the right way at the right time. And it's like the priorities and the focus are hardly ever where they need to be. And it ends up in conflict and struggle and not so favorable outcomes.
Right. And I think one of the worst places you could be is in that space of thinking that you've been victimized by not have been taught the right things. Because that's not very philosophical.
And I've been there.
Right. And I have too. And I feel like a lot of us have. And it's a weird place to be because you're giving too much credence to whatever it is that didn't want you to understand without taking the accountability of doing your own understanding. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And you're putting all of that power and capability in somebody else's hands.
Somebody else's hands, right.
When you have the resources, you have the mind, you have the time, and someone else may have the role of being your educator, mentor, coach, leader, whatever you want to call them, but the work has to be done by you, and they're not here to serve you this information. They're here to expose you to it so you can have your own process of actually finding the truth, right? And I think that teachers just have so much pressure on them because parents literally expect them to raise their kids, teach them all these values, teach them the truth about the world, and then one thing's not taught the way that parent wants it to be, and then all of a sudden it's this big dumpster fire and they're angry, not realizing that they're not fulfilling their role in this equation, right?
Yeah, and like it's interesting too, because I recently was doing this group where we were talking about the American aircraft carriers and how, you know, as America, we have such a great military presence because of our aircraft carriers. That's what makes us very unique and gives us so much power in the seas of the world. And so the students asking me about military budgets and different like legs of the army and you know, armed forces in general. And I'm giving them these answers and rapid fire things that we can easily find the facts for. And his next hand gets raised up. Well, Mr. Davis, what do you think, President Biden or Donald Trump? And I'm like, and this is where I can't answer you anymore. Like, this is where I literally have to stop and say, hey, this is not an answer here. If I told you, it'd be worthless. So it's weird. It's weird how you can go from like, well, classroom teaching, blah, 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 to then a certain question gets answered. It's like, we have to cut it off right there because I can't give you an answer. And I honestly would be kind of doing you a disservice if I gave you my answer.
Definitely.
Because like, I'm not here to talk about that type of stuff. Like we can go find the facts that we know are cited. You're asking me a personal question that you got to go talk with your family and do some research yourself for.
And that's your philosophy, because a lot of teachers, I think, would feel that there's a right answer to that question. I would hope they wouldn't answer it.
And I know, definitely. And that's one thing I always want to avoid. Like things like religion, politics. Like, yeah, you could see that my energy has come to a certain place because of what I do believe in. And you can like big up me for somehow getting here. But I don't want to necessarily give you like my viewpoints on the things that aren't so fact-based.
Only in the classroom setting, you're saying, or in general?
I would only say in a public classroom setting, like a public school classroom setting. That's the only way, because definitely if I'm in a conversation with somebody and they want to ask me about why I feel like I'm successful, like I'm going to say my faith is one of the biggest things. Like I'm going to talk about my relationship with God and all these different things that I believe in, but I'm just talking about like in a public school.
Yeah, it's interesting you said. I used to hesitate to say I'm successful. I'm like, I'm not successful yet. I want to be. Well, no, I'm currently successful. I'm on the road to success. My end peak success is not anywhere close to where I am, but like I've already done much more than a whole lot of other people, and it's not even about me comparing to them. But like you said, my faith, the way that I operate, my philosophy, the way that I think and believe, this is definitely success that I'm reaping right now.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's so easy to lose sight of that just because, like I said, the comparison and focusing on the finish line and just a lack of gratitude, really. A lack of gratitude. We just talked to Omar Susi, and he's someone who has always shown gratitude, in my opinion, as far as his faith and how he interacts with people. And I just think that it's so easy to be quote unquote successful when you're grateful for your situation and the interactions that you have the opportunity to have.
Yeah, it is.
Because people want to help you out. They're like, oh wow, like he's really nice. He helped me out and he appreciates me. I don't even know why he appreciates me. He's expressing gratitude. Like, I hope that they'll do well. I've had that situation so many times to where people are asking to do things for her. I was like, I don't really have any, I can't think of how you could actually help me, but I'm glad you want to, right? And so I also say that because I've always been someone that found it hard to ask for help. And now that's definitely not me. And I recognize when other people have that same issue. And I don't know where the pride comes into where we don't feel like we're supposed to be resourceful between one another. And we have to have this just really difficult solo effort in everything we do. It's like I've struggled through that before. Like, this person has this experience, this background. Like, this can be easier for you. But I think some people are addicted to difficulty, which can be good, but also not everything has to be difficult. Right. And we can learn easy lessons by just listening to someone else's experience.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And I'm wondering, how do you think that people get, or someone can get addicted to difficulties?
So there's science and literature that shows we naturally as humans have this desire for tension and drama. And of course, if you ask someone, it's like, no, I want a smooth path. Like, I don't like drama. Like, but if things are smooth, we as humans will typically do something to shake things up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And if you are not taking on challenging tasks and pushing yourself physically, exerting this effort and having this planned, controlled discomfort in your life, you're going to have maladaptive behaviors that are going to bring this stress and this pressure into your situation. So I think that people get stuck in this loop of not pushing themselves and aspiring to be better as a person and not really having any drive or determination to educate themselves and be vulnerable and be in a situation where they look like they don't know anything. And then they end up seeking that difficulty elsewhere, and it pops out in their relationships and their small interactions with strangers, and they're all of a sudden drawing in all of this negative energy, and it's really just kind of balancing this threshold of stress and difficulty. But
you could take control of it.
You could take control of it.
You just didn't take control of it.
The people that have a routine of waking up and accomplishing all the things that they don't want to do, but they know they have to do it.
Facts.
And working out hard because they want to reap those delayed benefits, that lifestyle and structure is going to lead you to, one, being grateful that you are able to do those things, and two, not really having time to have the unnecessary drama, right? I think that people that are addicted to the drama and the negativity and scrolling to find bad things on the internet and go gossip about it, and that's what the base of their day is, that it's filling a hole that they don't know how to fill otherwise. And it really stems from a lack of purpose, I would say.
Yeah, fill that. So, I mean, it's great what you're saying, and it's like, just to get into the action, it's like, fill that hole with some purpose, right? Fill it with some studying towards a goal, or through just repetition of a habit. Or I thought it was awesome how Omar Susi, when he was talking about writing, he was talking about how he just wanted to do like 1,000 words a day. And
standard minimum.
Right. And if we were to sit here and talk to Damian Lillard, he would tell us he probably shoots 1,000 jump shots a day.
Right.
And if we want to talk to Jay-Z in his prime, it's 1,000 bars or whatever words. Like it's the same consistent thing with everyone who expands themselves to a place they want to be. They just have set up time to go into their discipline and
routine. And you brought up the difference between theology and philosophy, but I think a lot of people's theology allows them to have a positive philosophy. It's just, unfortunately, as time goes on and numbers grow, it's hard to maintain quality with increasing quantity, regardless of the context, in my opinion. You see restaurants scale. That first little mom and pop shop is so delicious. Everybody loved that secret recipe. And now they have 100 stores that are trying to mass produce, and they have 1,000 customers coming in every hour. It's a different situation when you try to increase the quantity and maintain the quality. In the same way for how you're going to take in information. It's like, we have all these sources. I want to diversify my sources, right? But you're listening to 12 different news channels, and that's all you're doing in your day. You don't have time to process that information or really absorb it then the quality of that information you received is not going to ever really reach its potential in your mind.
Right. And that's
a bunch of chatter.
Right. And that's how you get right back to the benefit of developing and studying philosophy. Because, I mean, they talk about like Occam's razor, or they talk about the Socratic method. These are all basically tools that are within you to help you dissect any group of information that comes up to you to see, one, what you think as far as citations go are true, but then also what resonates within you. And I think that that's something that does matter, is developing a process to see what information hits home. And I think if you get to that point, that's where you're starting to be like a pro or something of that nature.
Yeah.
That can be hard though, because I'm sure if you have like ignorance, you could possibly resonate with something that's false.
Oh yeah.
But I would love to believe that we have some type of like internal, like peer review, divine process. But I know
if you haven't put up the reps.
Exactly. You have to work for that. You have to work for the internal peer review.
You have to have something to base it off of and compare it to understand that this is false information.
Correct.
If you're completely ignorant and have never even tried educating yourself, you're just going to be thirsty for that information. And as soon as you think you got a fact, it's a fact.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that happens a whole lot too.
For sure. Yeah. And that's how someone gets seen as like a crazy person, right? Because they might identify so hard with a fact that isn't true.
And it was the first fact they heard, basically.
And they're super excited about it. Like,
and they want to tell everybody. And they're so focused on this one fact. I have a fact. I finally got a fact. I'm going to tell them. It's like, whoa. One, that's not right. Two, you shouldn't even be that excited about it.
Yeah, for real.
They get very tunnel vision.
For sure. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's a really good point, because it's similar to how when you'll see kids playing a sport, it's like they could make their first basket and start like jumping off to the sideline and like celebrating. And now the person they were guarding just scored. So it almost negated the whole fact that you scored. But you're like super geeked and trying to get a picture taken. It's like almost with all things where we start to get a little bit more and more, we have to act like we've been there and accept it with just a like calm temperament.
Yeah. And it's hard to do. People think it's a boring way to go about, right? But you just have to have a different idea of what that internal gratification is going to look and feel like.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which is going to be the most important gratification, right?
For sure. And then for us as adults, I mean, we obviously, as I'm 27, moving into getting older, see the value of having a family or people around you that know when to congratulate you and also when to be like, hey, you got some work to do. Like both of those things seem like something beautiful to have within the home.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I know when to tell you, oh my gosh, this is a threshold that you just broke. And I know when to be like, encourage you to do your discipline.
Yeah. And it's hard to hear that from the people that you want to be supporting you and showing you that unconditional love. It can feel like, man, they're hating, like they don't understand. Like, no, this is this. But again, it's your perspective, right? And if you want it to mean anything to other people, the least you can do is take the perspective of the folks that have always shown you love and always been there to support you and always been honest with you. Because you'll one day find that even some of your supporters are not being genuine, right? And if you fall back on your faith in yourself and your faith in your family and hopefully your faith in God, then those outside perspectives are not going to really weigh in so much and have such a drastic effect when they're exposed for like what they really are. And you can get caught up in chasing the support too, right? So having the foundation within yourself is important because one, you might not find the support that you're looking for. And that support could fluctuate. It might not look the way that you wanted. It might not come from who you wanted it to, but it's only a piece of what should be motivating you to continue to seek out the truth and work towards your purpose, right?
Yeah, that's real. That's real. Yeah.
I think, philosophy as a whole, it can be kind of scary to think about to the average person initially because you just don't understand how everything we do stems from our philosophy of what it is we're doing.
Everything. Every
Everything.
act that you choose to put into the world comes from how you were thinking was the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I tried to find a little graphic that I posted on Instagram the other day where it was arrows pointing from thoughts to choices, pointing to behaviors, pointing to emotions, and then looping back to the thoughts, right? And then so it all starts with a thought.
Yeah.
And you create this cycle that you're in. Your routine can be seen as a cycle. We have positive and healthy cycles. Hopefully your routine is a healthy one. If not, it has the opportunity to be that. You have control of your routine to an extent. And thinking the right thoughts can just set you up for so much success down that chain of reaction. Some people don't understand like why I'm so out of tune with my emotions, or, you know, I can't control my behaviors. And it's like, well, you're not thinking the right way. You had the wrong thought to start with.
Yeah.
So it's not going to translate into what you want it to be.
For sure. And it's such a great point to point out to people. You might get the pushback of somebody who understands that they've had a traumatic experience but doesn't understand how to integrate that in a healthy way yet. And they might be like, well, I have this, you know, dissonance within that system because of a traumatic event.
Yeah.
And it's very real to recognize that, but it's also like, well, you can come to a therapeutic understanding. So then that whole cycle of thought, you know, behavior, emotion becomes like more fluid again. And there's not a kink in your cycle. Because in my opinion, that's what trauma does, is it takes the stimulus, and before it gets put into a healthy thought, it integrates it into a thought that is more fear or anxiety based. And then it registers into you that way. Whereas a lot of our stimuli isn't that. It's really love and different, more positive things.
Yeah. And that negative thought stimulates a negative choice, which becomes negative behaviors and negative emotions.
For sure.
That chain that way. But yeah, we've talked about trauma on here before, and I think we should just assume that everyone has a level of trauma.
I would.
That's part of life.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the danger of comparing trauma. And that's very important because, one, you don't want to be the winner of the trauma battle. Right? That's not a good point to prove in the first place.
For sure. Like, you're just going to go home and cry.
Yeah. like, okay, good for you. Good luck.
Good for you. Like,
but
hope you make it home safe.
Also, the problem is identifying with the trauma, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I have to be empathetic when I talk about this just because I have been blessed in my journey, but I've experienced my fair share of trauma. I've told my wife, I feel like a lot of my trauma was in relation to my profession as an adult, which is a very different situation to be in if you have like a traumatic childhood in relation to your parents, right? Something like that. But at the same time, when you're 40, 50 years old and you're still identifying with childhood trauma, there might be opportunity for you to go seek some help and get over this. And it sounds bad to say like you need to get over this, but the fact is you can get over this. There's just a certain process that you need to go through. And that trauma isn't going to erase itself from your past, but you accepting it for what it is can really open up a lot of opportunity for your future. Yeah.
And where it can become so difficult is if that person identifies with it as almost a badge of honor, right? Like, I went through this. Look how tough I am at coping with the world, when really it's like, no, you need to get back to that healthy, integrated.
That's what they bring up anytime they feel misunderstood, right? It's their go-to, bringing up that trauma.
Yeah. Like,
you don't understand me.
You don't understand. I came from this tougher, I came from this more violent, more traumatic thing. And it's like, okay, but you identifying with that is going to make you more individualized and take you away from the healthy social
holding you
interactions.
back.
It's holding you back.
Yeah.
It's holding you back in a lot of ways.
Living in the past.
That's the hard part, man. It's crazy we're talking about this because, like, that's the hard part about coming up, loving hip hop and rap, and still trying to be like a healthy, loving human being because you're bumping trauma. And you love it because it's rhythmic and it sounds so good, but you do have to understand that what you are intaking a lot of times are traumatic experiences, And
someone was expressing that, that was their release of that trauma.
Yes.
And you're indulging in the trauma.
And now it can be cathartic to identify with their traumas, but it can be detrimental to say that you have a hand up in the world because of the trauma that you went through.
And some people are identifying with the trauma without having gone through anything close to it.
Right.
Just because they like the music.
For sure. And they just want to be entertained by other people's trauma. Like, not realizing that it's entertaining for them. It's not necessarily cathartic. It's entertaining. And that gets more into the idea of like the Roman Colosseum with people getting thrown into lion pits. That's kind of the energy that they're manifesting in that, rather than like, you know, having a therapeutic effect. So that's what I'm just saying. It's like one of the obstacles that a culture has to get over if they do listen to a lot of trauma. You got to understand that for you to have a healthy integration, you got to also come back to yourself and find the peace and love.
That's a whole different conversation. I was thinking about on an individual level. You talk about cultures and the trauma that a whole country can go through, right? 9/11. Yeah. Just how many people were affected by that in so many different ways. And a lot of people were right in the thick of it. And there are people across the world that felt like they experienced the same level of trauma, right? And again, you can't compare trauma, but it's like we could all say that you standing watching the tower is going to be a lot different than you watching on the news. But you, again, don't know the background behind all of it. Yeah. Right?
And now we're in a world where us watching it on the news gets compared to these kids who just learned about it as some past event. It wasn't even in their lifetime. So it's like the trauma slowly starts to become this whole other thing depending on your position.
And I mean, to an extent, you want people to be able to understand and relate to it still, but if you weren't alive during that time, then it's a whole different deal.
That's interesting because we get into all this history about slavery and these different, you know, African-American group traumatic things that we want to learn about. We're further removed from slavery than these kids are to 9/11, but we identify closer with it than they do with 9/11. It's kind of interesting.
And it's, you know, again, all back to perspective and not comparing trauma and still accepting how things...
You know what? Let me say, because the example I just gave is bad, because 9/11 was one morning long, and slavery was 500, 600 years long.
It's bad to us, but some people think that it's on par. And it, again, is perspective, because we know the things that have been compared to slavery, and we know how long and awful and impactful that period was. Yeah. But like you said, the people that are, one, don't feel connected to it because it's not relevant to their actual experience as an individual. And two, because it was X amount of years in the past. Yeah. And three, because they were given a certain piece of information about those things, and they're willing to just take that for what it is. Yeah. All those are things we have to take into consideration, not only with this topic, but all topics, right? And that's why it's so funny how riled up people get in discussing these things, because once that emotion just bursts through, you see that you're not being empathetic. Your anger is a lack of empathy because you don't understand that that person may just be ignorant. And we've coined this term ignorance as being negative, but we're all ignorant to something because we haven't put the time to learn about it. Yeah. That's and all we'll ignorance
never
is.
Be like omniscient. We're always going to be ignorant to some aspect of the world.
But we think of ignorance as a label, like you are an ignorant person, you don't know anything. And we can't say that about anybody, right?
That's true.
But we just have to be careful about how we label things and just the big picture of it all, because nothing that we prioritize as an individual is going to be as important as the person next to us. Yeah. And that can be very upsetting, especially when something means so much to you and you feel like it's played such a role in your life and who I am today. Like, how dare you not care at all? Yeah. But there's something they care about a lot that you don't care about. you know?
And then you guys also have the things that you do care about that you share in common, like your mortality and the fact that you and the people you love are eventually going to get up out of here. And now you're starting to get into why a lot of people like to share and be entertained by philosophy. Because even though we have all these differences, there's certain things that we all have the same exact destiny for. And when we talk about them, you know, we like to listen.
I used to get annoyed by people that would just voluntarily tell me stories without me like really being interested. But I now understand the desire to tell a story and the importance of having the opportunity to tell a story. And I try my best to listen, but there's just so many different contexts and situations where like people just, again, don't have the empathy to know that this isn't a story that I would ever care about, but they need to tell that story and they feel like I'm that person. And I feel like I'm often in that place, which now I, you know, show gratitude in people feeling that comfortable that I can be the person to take their story in. And I can do what I want with the story. Hopefully it don't take too much of my time, because that's usually what kind of annoys me about it. I'm like, dang, this is taking a long time. I don't really care that much, but it matters to somebody, right? And we get so caught up in the rat race of our 24 hours in the day, and I have all these things that I need to accomplish, but I've recently been giving myself more grace and not completing all my tasks on my list, and just knowing that that doesn't give me the opportunity to not try to complete all those things the next day, but life does get in the way, and we talk about wearing all these hats, and sometimes one role demands more of you one day than the other, and you just have to be adaptable, be flexible, be malleable, and of course that is a skill, but we often don't give ourselves the credit for the effort that we put forth. And if you're not putting forth the effort, that's a whole different conversation, but if you're really trying out here, there's no reason to beat yourself up when you fall short.
Yeah, you're trying.
Which is my philosophy.
Try.
But some people really bully themselves into success and greatness, which I think in hindsight, they have some regret, but they get to at least where they were aiming at. So it just depends on what you feel is going to make sense for your journey. I feel like the path of least resistance is often there for the taking, and sometimes that can seem like the easy way out, and you might think that the rough road is going to build you up stronger than the ladder, but it's really trial and error when it comes down to it. Gotta try.
Yeah, you gotta try.
That's the first step.
Gotta try, man. Gotta try.
And so,
and not be scared. And that's where we get into what we think. Is what you're thinking making you more afraid or less afraid?
Yeah. And I think that the thought of trying can be scary, right? Because you don't want your efforts to be in vain. Yeah. But also just know that...
Well, the thought of failing can be scary, right?
The thought of trying could be scary.
Like, well, if we only knew we'd succeed when we tried, like, it would be like, all right, cool. Like, we would try. But it's like the fact that there's
you and I,
Yeah.
Some people
don't
that
want to succeed.
Putting forth the effort is the scariest part. They don't want to do that.
That's true.
I've had people tell me that, like, I really don't like being uncomfortable. Like, working out sucks. Like, I've had my clients that continue to see me, but it's because I put them in the space where they have to do these things that they know they need to do, and they know they wouldn't do it without me. Yeah. But they're not excited about putting forth effort. Right. And I didn't necessarily look at it that way, but people have told me that. I was like, man, you just don't like trying hard? Like, yeah, it's hard. Like, well, yeah, that's the point. Yeah. But we do this and it's hard, and you accomplish and overcome, so that all the other things that you have to do aren't quite as hard because you're used to putting forth that effort and trying. True. But I think some people see like intense effort being associated with negative things, like tasks that they don't want to do.
I feel that.
Right. And they haven't found that thing they care about enough to put in intense effort because they like it. But I try to find some enjoyment in all the things that I have to do, because either way you have to do it.
Sure, and you're alive to do it.
Well, yeah, and you're alive to do it, so you should be grateful. But like me talking about the fact that I don't want to do it is not going to help me be any better at it, right? And then the task is still staring you in the face.
And you can get really good at talking about not wanting to do it. Like, not only are you not going to get better at what you should be doing, you're going to get better at the excuses.
You got to be around the right people. That's why,
God,
hiring processes are so important. If you want a successful business or work environment, it takes one negative person to spread the fire and everybody's like on the wrong page.
Man, you hit it on the head. That's real.
Yeah.
That's real.
I think, philosophy should be at the heart of all of our efforts.
Yeah.
And
take your time.
in the forefront of our minds.
Yeah, you take your time and learn. Study these things. This has been a really fun podcast for myself because I can't wait to go back and listen to this and hear some of the things we said that I already kind of. I know. I'm like, man, I can't wait to edit this and then listen to it again.
Hey, but that's love in the process, and that's why we do this, because it does have a different level of discipline. We don't have to make this show. We're doing plenty of other things outside of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not always easy to get it done.
Yeah, but it always feels great once we do it.
Always.
You know what I mean? I'm sitting here thinking
100%.
about the end of this whole process we've done today, and I'm like, man, this is awesome. Awesome.
Get to go pat myself on the back.
There it is.
And watch some football.
There it is.
All right, y'all. Thanks for listening. You know where to contact us. rnbpod at gmail.com.
The letter N, R, the letter N.
Letter N, all lowercase. Shout out Rhythm and Balance for the production. Beautiful.
And when this episode comes out, it will be December. Correct?
It will be.
Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will be December when this
It
comes
will
out.
be.
So, man.
Happy December.
Oof.
Man.
Flying
the
by.
fourth quarter of the fourth quarter. Wow. And 2024 is going to be a big year, y'all. So with that being said, please reach out to us, rnbpod at gmail.com, and let us know what you want to see next year. If we need to switch it up a little bit.
Do you like the guests? Do you like us? I hear people give me so many different opinions about it. They like when we talk to people. They like when we talk to each other.
What do you hear?
All types of different. Some people love our guests, episodes, and some people love just us. Actually, this one lady I work with was telling me she was listening to episode 28 or something and found so much motivation in what it is that we were talking about. And as she was telling me, I'm like, that's funny because I remember being tired that day. I remember it was 9 p.m. Remember we met at the gym.
Oh, man.
I was tired. We had both had long
That was her
days.
favorite?
We recorded a podcast and she was like, man, there's so much gyms in that. And I'm sitting there thinking wow, that's crazy that even regardless of how maybe I felt while I was recording it, we just got stuff out of us that felt cool to someone else. So that's dope.
Yeah. I mean, shoot, if we need to split up into 2 shows, let us know, right? We'll be having a Patreon coming out soon, so please continue to support, share, subscribe. Definitely excited for that venture. We'll have some special content for the folks that want to support us in that manner, so that you guys kind of feel the exclusive experience, but also definitely want to continue to give out the value for the free content, because we don't ever want someone to be excluded from the opportunity to open their mind and take on the pursuit of personal development. And any positive vibes that we can share to one member of the community, we expect to spread like wildfire and be contagious to all the people that they live around and interact with as well. So the purpose of this is always going to be much more than monetary value or exclusivity, but also want to have a different appeal to our show for y'all. So just continue to give us that feedback, because we do take it to heart and appreciate every single one of our listeners, whether you're on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I hope you listen to all of them and like on all of them and share with at least one person that you love, because we love y'all. So spread the love. And on that note,
Like last week, we'll see you next week.
peace.
Peace.